Preservation Austin is proud to present our 2021 virtual homes tour. Rogers Washington Holy Cross, Black Heritage Living History, generously supported by title sponsors IBC Bank and Moreland Properties. Thank you to all of our sponsors for making this event possible, to our Home Tour Task Force for their hard work on this project, and to our homeowners who were so generous with their time and who graciously welcomed us into their homes. We're honored to be able to share their history with our community. All proceeds from tonight's event support our nonprofit's mission to empower Austinites to shape a more inclusive, resilient, and meaningful community culture through preservation. If you believe in this work as we do, please join us by becoming a member at preservationaustin.org. We thank you for being here tonight and hope you enjoy the event.
In a quiet, residential enclave of East Austin sits the Rogers Washington Holy Cross Historic District. Comprised of just 46 contributing homes, its small footprint belies the incredible legacy of history, activism, and community that exists here. The district stands just 2 miles east of the Texas Capitol, bound by East Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, Chestnut Avenue, East 21st Street, and Cedar Avenue. It bears the name of African Americans Eli Rogers and Dr. Marcellus Washington, who previously owned and later developed the land, and of the nearby Holy Cross Hospital. An important East Austin hallmark, the 1951 hospital served the city's African American community. But like so many revered black institutions from this era, it was demolished 40 years later. East Austin's development was defined by the segregationist policies of the Jim Crow South. Legal segregation began with racial covenants on property deeds that barred people of color from living in certain neighborhoods, mainly those in West and North Austin. These private practices were later codified by the 1928 city plan that pushed Black and Latino Austinites east of I-35 by denying city services to those who resisted relocation. Housing segregation was further enshrined in a 1934 city survey produced by the Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation, established to facilitate homeownership by restructuring existing mortgages on better terms. The agency's risk assessment maps, however, redlined hazardous areas and prohibited federally backed mortgages for homes there. Virtually all majority Black and Hispanic neighborhoods in Austin were redlined based on race and regardless of actual condition. This included much of East Austin, along with former freedman colonies citywide. Home ownership became easier for white residents living in desirable neighborhoods, and that much harder for Black residents with limited housing options. After World War II, hard-won economic, educational, and social opportunities created an emergent Black middle class seeking its own vision of suburban life. Yet the post-war building boom was largely out of their reach, again because of segregationist policies. The Federal Housing Administration prohibited Black families from obtaining the same low-cost mortgages available to white families, or from buying into the large-scale, developer-driven subdivisions that the agency backed. Black Americans had to find alternative and often more expensive routes to homeownership. These incredible barriers made the existence of African American communities like Rogers Washington Holy Cross all the more remarkable. And remarkable it was. By the late 1950s, incoming city services readied Rogers Washington Holy Cross for exciting new growth. The neighborhood attracted Black professionals of all stripes largely by word of mouth, including school teachers, professors, business owners, and veterans. Like so many post-war suburbs, ranch-style homes prevail here, ranging from stylish to modest. Streetscapes feature single-story homes with gabled roofs, front picture windows, and open porches and carports. Inside, colorfully tiled bathrooms, wood-paneled walls, and knotty pine cabinetry abound. Rogers Washington Holy Cross residents often worked directly with building professionals to design their homes, resulting in an architectural character that reflects the personal tastes of each family. Character which distinguishes their neighborhood from the segregated, large-scale FHA-backed subdivisions with hundreds of inexpensive but identical homes. Developed during the height of the Civil Rights Movement, at a time of increased economic prosperity for all, the neighborhood was imbued with a sense of optimism and promise that homeownership brings. In Rogers' Washington Holy Cross, this sentiment found architectural expression through the use of modern styles, which looked with hope towards a more just and prosperous future. Our first home is that of Mr. Ira Pool at the corner of East Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard and Maple Avenue, made famous by Mr. Pool's iconic display of Americana sculpture, seen throughout his yard. In the 1950s, while Mr. Pool was a student at Huston-Tillotson University, he happened upon Dr. Washington's property on what was then East 19th Street.
It was all vacant, and I went to the owner, Dr. Washington, and asked him if he would sell me part of it or all of it, and I didn't have a penny to buy it. If he had said yes, I don't know what I would have done.
By the time the land was developed, Mr. Poole had begun his career as a school teacher and approached the Austin-Travis County Teachers Credit Union, which helped black teachers secure loans during segregation. There he met some of his future neighbors, whose homes we'll visit later in the tour.
And so they took my application, and then when it was passed, well, then I went back. But now, mind you, when they wanted to know what I was going to do with the money, so I told them I was buying a lot here, and this was they beat me to buying the lot. Phillips went right away and bought a lot. Well, she bought the lot that I wanted. And then Mr. Calhoun bought the lot up there on the corner here.
Mr. Poole designed this home himself in 1964 and later redesigned the roof to resemble the pyramids of Giza. He began installing works of sculpture in his yard in 1972, starting with the Sphinx. This began as a papier-mâché project with his students, but he soon had the sculpture rendered in concrete after local fraternities began stealing it.
So this time I said, well, if somebody wants it that bad, I'm gonna have a mold made. And I had a mold made. And then, getting the mold made, I poured concrete in it. I fixed it up in concrete like you see it sitting out there now. And we got all the steel in it. I said, let them see if they can break it and lift it this time. And they did. They tried to come and lift it, but they didn't get very far.
Other sculptures include a replica of the Statue of Liberty, a Heart of Texas rose bed, and a bas-relief map of the United States. Mr. Poole's yard garnered much attention from tourists on their way into town from the old Miller Airport, so much so that he began keeping a guest book to have a record of all who paid him a visit. His yard has been featured in numerous articles, TV programs, and even student theses. A rancher and skilled horseman, Mr. Poole often rode as the lead in the sheriff's posse on his beloved Palomino, Playboy, in parades. A star in his own right, Playboy was once invited into the University of Texas Law Library for a special photo opportunity.
They called me to the library and to show me where they wanted me to go. So I took, one of it was kind of a black fluent in my house there. It was slick. I said, he can't walk on this with his shoes. It's skid. They made a carpet trail going into the library from outside for Playboy to walk in on.
Mr. Poole is one of Roger Washington Holy Cross's few original owners remaining. He has championed the neighborhood's black history, including advocating for the renaming of 19th Street after the late Dr. King, and insisting that Dr. Washington's legacy was remembered in the naming of the historic district. Today he lives with his daughter Marilyn, an attorney and avid preservationist of her neighborhood's history. At 90 years of age, Mr. Poole continues to upkeep the property himself, maintaining his sculptures and tending to his flowers. Carnegie Harvard Mims, Sr., and his wife May Lyons Mims built this Weber Avenue home in 1961. Mr. and Mrs. Mims, both educators by profession, taught at various schools across the state, including Central High in San Angelo, where Mr. Mims was the first black principal to serve an integrated high school in the state of Texas. Looking for greater opportunity for their 4 children, the Mims relocated to Austin in 1958, though their options were limited due to redlining. Their daughter, Brenda Malik, remembers moving into the neighborhood and what life was like growing up in East Austin during segregation.
I was between 8 and 9 years old, and we lived on 12th Street, a couple of doors down from the Harlem Theater. But my family thought we could find a more homey, conducive neighborhood to live in. But when they started looking, I quickly found out that unless you had a lot of money, there were very few options for black professionals. So we looked at Stonegate, McKinley Heights, and Rogers, Washington neighborhood. So we settled here. Everything in East Austin was sustainable. We had all of our grocery stores, our businesses, our cleaners, the theater, church, schools, everything you needed was right here. So it was quite late in my education that I found out that there was a need for integration. And actually, I didn't even know that there was a race problem until I went to our carnival, and some of the kids called me the N-word, and that's the first time I'd heard it as a child. And I asked my brother and sister what it meant, and they said that it's just an ugly word to call you. So all I could think of calling them back was sour milk. But that was my first introduction. So I was a happy child.
Brenda inherited her family's home and lives there today. Its gabled roof and open carport are hallmarks of RWHC architecture, as is another unique feature: 2 primary entrances.
So we knew if anyone came to the front door, we didn't know them. Anyone that we knew always knew to go to the back door. It's really because that's where we were. That's the entrance to the kitchen in most of the homes here. So we could tell who was coming to the house, if they were friend or foe.
Despite being highly educated, Mr. and Mrs. Mims took on lesser professional positions to live in Austin, where they hoped their greater ambitions for their children could be realized. Brenda's brother, Carnegie Harvard Mims Jr., was the first ombudsman at the University of Texas at Austin while he was a student there. He would later go on to have an auspicious legal career, clerking with State Senator Barbara Jordan and serving as a briefing attorney for the Texas Supreme Court before establishing his own firm in Houston. Like her brother, Miss Malik has achieved tremendous professional success. While studying at the University of Texas at Austin in the early 1970s, Brenda became a news anchor, reporter, and producer with KTVV Channel 36, and later KTBC Channel 7, during a time where there were almost no black broadcasters on the news. As a broadcaster, Miss Malik covered a variety of stories, including sports, local news, and civil rights protests, and she was often assigned to interview prominent people passing through Austin, including Nancy Reagan and Mr. James Brown.
What's your name?
My name is Brenda.
Brenda, okay.
Is this your first time here?
First time? Oh, no. I was
Right,
here.
I remember.
No, I was here so many times. I was probably here before you was born.
No.
I was here when I was even here when the sniper was doing the shooting. I was here that day.
My brother was going to university then. We were real scared.
Yeah. I was downtown then. Yes, I've been here a long time.
I appreciated going through that learning and being out in the community because I could see the impact I was having on the little kids. They would just go, wow, you're in the news. And so I felt a deep commitment to be a representative in Austin for news broadcasting.
Miss Malik's storied career continued on in 1979 when she went on to work as a council aide to Councilmember Jimmy Snell, her neighbor in Rogers, Washington Holy Cross. And in the early 80s, she returned to TV at Austin Community Television, where she produced the popular dance show for local teenagers called Jam City. The Mims home has seen children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren pass through its doors for the past 60 years, yet classic post-war features remain, including the knotty pine cabinetry, colored tile bathrooms, and the front picture window. These historic touches, along with the home's gallery walls of family photos and achievements, exist as a testament to the living legacy of the greater Mims family. Our next home is that of Captain Norman Scales, a fighter pilot and member of the legendary Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen were the country's first African-American squadron of combat aviators during a time when the military was strictly segregated. For their significant contributions to the war effort, they've gone down in history among the bravest and most decorated service members. Captain Scales, Austin's first black fighter pilot, flew 70 missions over enemy territory and even survived a plane crash. He was awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross at Bergstrom Air Force Base for his service, and today a street in the Mueller neighborhood bears his name. Following the war, Captain Scales returned to Austin and married Lydia Mackey, a schoolteacher in Weberville. The couple had 2 sons and built this home in 1959. Despite his achievements, Captain Scales' return from service was marked by the realities of the Jim Crow South, where racial animus endured and black soldiers were denied the benefits of the GI Bill that their white counterparts enjoyed.
They needed to take a taxi to come back, whatever. And he told me that they had to get permission from the white people that were getting ready to get in their cab to let him ride in there. Otherwise, they weren't going to let him get in there, even though he was in uniform. And he said, people said, well, he served our country, so let him ride with us. According to what my mother had on here, they didn't really want to offer him another job. And so that put him having to work with his uncle at the Driscoll until he got on with the state working at the Capitol. And he worked there for a while. And then I think he worked at the University of Texas. He was at the athletic dorm doing those things there, you know. And I've been really, what have you, when he died, I said, I don't think the University of Texas really knew who he really was.
His son, Norman Scales Jr., became a professional musician and played saxophone in a soul band called No Jive, a 10-piece band that often used the Scales family kitchen for practice space. Following in his father's footsteps, he also became an amateur pilot. He remembers flying out to Tuskegee to compete in memorial air shows, where he once won 3rd place in competition.
Well, I was amazed at how many black pilots there were from around the country. And one of the things I learned there, that it didn't matter how much money you made, you were all in a brotherhood, you know, people. And it was just amazing. I really tried to get my dad to go with me to the Tuskegee, and he wouldn't go. So I got him once, I'm glad I did, to come fly with me one time. So me and my son, we went flying. And then I let go of the airplane and tell him, so you got the airplane. He flew it. So, yeah, and that was that. So I was grateful.
Norman Jr. takes great care in the preservation of his father's memory. Seen here are his collection of medals, awards, photographs, and poster boards his family created to tell his father's story. A particularly treasured item is his father's full-dress uniform jacket, worn when he received his Distinguished Flying Cross. In 2009, he returned home to care for his mother, and has been living here with his family since. Walking down Weber Avenue, one will likely hear the sound of wind chimes emanating from the Scales house and see Norman Jr. sitting out on the porch.
And if you look at the majority of the homes around here, all of them have porches. You know, everybody sat out on the porch. As I've said, this porch has got more use because I'm here than my parents ever did. I don't ever remember my dad sitting out on that porch, ever. My mom might every so often, but it's a staple for me. I get to meet people.
Theodore T.C. Calhoun and Thelma Dodson Calhoun built this home on Gibbons Avenue in 1959. Like many RWHC residents, the Calhouns had moved eastward as new suburbs became available to black families. Local builder Hal Starkey designed their distinctive home with its low, elongated roof and clever integration of indoor and outdoor space. As their daughter Pat recalls, the house was designed with a California-style plan and intended to be built around a pool. However, the Calhouns didn't swim, and the pool was never built. But the sliding doors seen throughout remain as a vestige of this early design intent. Pat, seen here with her father as a little girl, grew up in her family's previous home on Cotton Street. She was just finishing high school when her parents built the house on Gibbons Avenue and recalls only a bit about that time.
No more than coming over, being excited about it going up and, watching it go up and that sort of thing. But my interests were elsewhere. The senior prom and getting ready to go to college and all of that good stuff.
Pat returned to Austin to take on stewardship of her parents' home following her mother's passing in 2015. She has been slowly updating it to suit her tastes, a process she describes as a work in progress. Original features are extensive, including the living room's exposed beams and clerestory windows, paneled wood walls throughout, a galley kitchen with wood cabinetry, shell pink tiles, and a pass-through window, and even furnishings, including the brocade-upholstered couch in the living room and the mid-century modern dining set and hutch. Mr. and Mrs. Calhoun were consummate educators. By the time they moved into their new home in 1960, Mr. Calhoun had been serving as principal at East Austin's Keeling Junior High for over 20 years.
He loved his kids. That was just his life, seeing the development of kids and that age group too, because that's just when they're starting to really develop into who they're going to be. And he just, as I said, that was just his life, was being an educator.
Mrs. Calhoun likewise felt that children's education was more than just a career, but a calling that suffused all aspects of her life. Descended from a long line of educators, she served as supervisor for the segregated Travis County schools, and later was a reading specialist for the Austin Independent School District. Despite the landmark Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court case of 1954, Austin's public schools remained de facto segregated until 1971, when the federal government forced compliance on the district. For East Austin, this meant the closure of Keeling and Elsie Anderson High School and the beginning of busing students out of their neighborhoods. While the necessity for integration was plainly evident, the burden largely fell on black Austinites. Pat recalls the effect this transition had on her family.
They decided to close Keeling. That's when my dad made the decision to retire. And I don't think he was quite ready to go. And the fact that they were closing the school was just very difficult for him to, see that and watch that. Just as we talk about this community being a close-knit family, the schools were as well. And you lose that support system. It's not only difficult for the children to make that transition when nobody's coming east, everybody's going west, and losing the support, teachers as well as students. It just was a tough transition.
The Calhouns were deeply committed to the civic life of their community and held leadership positions in organizations such as the Children's Haven Association and the Teachers State Association of Texas. The Teachers Association was founded during Reconstruction and achieved crucial civil rights wins for black students and teachers in Texas. Mr. Calhoun served as president of the association in 1963 and was instrumental in creating the Austin-Travis County Teachers Credit Union, which backed loans for several homes in Rogers, Washington, Holy Cross. Pat describes her parents' lifelong dedication to service as stemming from their deeply held faith. The Calhouns joined many of their neighbors on Sundays at Ebenezer Third Baptist Church on East 10th Street, where Mrs. Calhoun ran the children's choir and Mr. Calhoun sang in the bright and early choir, one of the first to broadcast on the radio.
Actually, both families are very musical. They both, a lot of them sang, had great voices. It skipped me and my mother. My mother was musical as well, but not. We don't have good voices. We couldn't sing.
Pat was one of the first African Americans registered as an interior designer. Today, she's a manufacturer's representative with her own agency that she runs out of the home. Pat is also something of a family historian. Her home is filled with antique photographs and documents chronicling the many branches of her family tree spanning centuries. A particularly special touch are the heirloom quilts still on display, some of them over a century old. With a deep love for history and her community, Pat understands the power that place has to connect people with the past.
I think when you realize that there's a story behind whatever, whether it's a building or a house, there's something that's created within. And I think you develop a little more respect for whatever it is when you can say, oh, that's what took place here. Oh, that's who was living here.
Marion and Sophia Jackson built this Gibbons Avenue home in 1959. Mr. Jackson was a postal carrier and among the first black employees of the Postal Service in Austin. Mrs. Jackson, a home economics instructor at Huston-Tillotson, was referred to the neighborhood by her colleague and future neighbor, Dr. John Q. Taylor King. Their daughter, LaVon, explains.
So most of the lots had been built on by that time. And she and my father came by and she looked at it. She said, this looks like a nice neighborhood. And of course, the selling point for her was the fact that there were a lot of professionals who lived in the neighborhood. There were teachers, there were nurses. Jimmy Snell's house next door, he was city council member. He served as a mayor pro tem. Then he became county commissioner, and she was really pleased to meet them. And then she met other people in the area.
After her parents' passing in the 1960s, LaVon and her husband, Dr. General Marshall, moved into the family home. The Marshalls were high school sweethearts who met at Keeling Junior High, where she was a flutist and he was a budding mathematician. Dr. Marshall attended Morehouse College in Atlanta, and Mrs. Marshall enrolled in Huston-Tillotson on a music scholarship, but the two reunited and were married. They worked together at Huston-Tillotson for 35 years, but early on, as parents to 3 young children, moving into a tight-knit community like Rogers, Washington Holy Cross had its child care benefits.
But the dear neighbor was Mrs. James, who lived 3 doors down. And she considered it her responsibility to watch out for the children on this street, and especially to check on their behavior. With Jeffrey and the 3 Snail boys next door, she would say, you know, Miss Marshall, if they get into anything, I'll let you know. Now, they had 2 rules that were no-nos. We had the drainage ditch right next to Miss James' house. They were told they could not be in that creek bed or walk down the drain. Invariably, as boys, saying it's a no-no meant go. Miss James would see them just headed in that direction. And she would say, I'm going to tell you, Mama, and I'm going to tell you, Daddy.
Dr. Marshall was a professor of math, but his first love was always golf. Growing up in West Austin's Black Clarksville community, he often caddied at Lyons Municipal Golf Course. He was there the day Muni desegregated in 1951, when two African-American boys quietly teed off one afternoon and made civil rights history. Of all of Dr. Marshall's golf trophies, his greatest was the red Mazda convertible, which he won shooting a hole-in-one at Muni, and in which he was often seen around town. Dr. Marshall was a crucial member of the Save Muni movement for decades. After his passing in 2020, the city of Austin proclaimed February 27, 2021, his birthday, General Marshall Day, in honor of his remarkable life and advocacy. Mrs. Marshall received an honorary doctorate in humane letters from Huston-Tillotson and a commendation from President Jimmy Carter in recognition of her exceptional civic service over the course of her life. She remains a generous steward of her neighborhood's history and her husband's memory. The magnificent Phillips house rises above the intersection of East Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard and Maple Avenue. Its cantilevered roof and river rock base give the home a sculptural feel that stands out amongst Austin's mid-century icons. Legendary architect John S. Chase designed the home in 1964, 14 years after making history as one of the first African Americans admitted to the University of Texas. Born in Maryland in 1925, Chase earned an architectural engineering degree at Virginia's Hampton Institute in 1948 and soon moved to Austin, where he taught at the Vocational Crescent Institute and designed houses for the Lott Lumber Company. The U.S. Supreme Court's landmark ruling in Sweat v. Painter opened the door for Chase to attend the UT School of Architecture by challenging Jim Crow's separate but equal underpinnings and desegregating the university's graduate programs. Dr. Tara Dudley is the author of the forthcoming book, There Is Something More to Be Done, The Life and Work of John Saunders Chase.
But even before his admission into the University of Texas and his graduation eventually, he became a very important figure and fixture in East Austin, in Black Austin, by virtue of his relationships with various professionals and educators and community leaders. He also married a native Austinite, Miss Drusy Rucker, whose family had long-standing ties throughout Austin and Travis counties as well.
Chase's master's thesis was entitled Progressive Architecture for the Negro Baptist Church. He saw the potential of modern, aspirational design to free Black congregations from the past and cited Frank Lloyd Wright among his influences. It proved the launching point for his groundbreaking firm, which he soon moved to Houston.
In the segregated South, upon his graduation, Chase couldn't find work even after moving to Houston. And so basically his thesis served as an opportunity for him to take around and share with congregations here in Austin, in Houston, and other places and say, hey, you know, I've written this thesis, here's how you too can have a modern church.
Chase later co-founded the National Organization of Minority Architects, was elected to the AIA College of Fellows, and became the first African American to serve on the United States Commission on Fine Arts. But his career started here, with early works stemming from relationships with future Rogers Washington Holy Cross homeowners. Chase designed the 1952 Colored Teachers State Association of Texas building on Navasota Street, later known as the House of Elegance, and is seen here with T.C. Calhoun at the building's groundbreaking. Around the corner on East 12th Street is Chase's King Tears Mortuary, designed for Dr. John Q. Taylor King in 1955, whose home we'll hear about later in the tour. Chase's design for David Chapel, completed in 1958 for a historic Black congregation, is one of Austin's most important works of architecture from any era. Its dramatic roofline and modernist bell tower overlook Rogers Washington Holy Cross from across East Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. And within the neighborhood are two homes Chase designed on Maple Avenue for widows Irene Thompson and Della Phillips in 1963 and after his death. Mrs. Thompson debated whether she was ready for a new home. Chase told her, "Let's get you ready."
Chase was commissioned to do the work on this home that you see here, an open plan, modern home that fit Miss Thompson's status as a hostess, as a leader in her sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha, and just a home where many Austinites could gather. And we know that, of course, that she was really influential in the African American business community, as an important community and civic leader who was involved in various activities and events to facilitate desegregation here in Austin.
Della Phillips was a respected educator for over 30 years and ran the Upshaw Phillips Funeral Home after her husband's death. She served with numerous committees for both her Zeta Phi Beta sorority and Ebenezer Baptist Church, frequently hosting events in her new home. Mrs. Phillips was known for her exquisite taste in clothes and cars, a sensibility that is very much reflected here. She gave Chase free rein in the design of her home.
Ms. Phillips was able to have John Chase design this wonderful tour de force of mid-century modern architecture with the folding plate roof, the stone, the marble on the facade. She even had an elevator on the inside of the home. And so I think it spoke not only to Mr. Chase's continued connections in East Austin, his relationships with the people that lived here, his understanding of how they lived, how they entertained, their important roles here in the community.
Mrs. Stella Banks bought the Phillips house in 1988. After graduating from Samuel Houston College, Stella toured nationally with the Ernie Fields Orchestra of Tulsa as a singer. She did graduate work in music at UCLA and was instrumental in the integration of the American Federation of Musicians. Current owners Penny and James Moore were planning a move to Austin in 2009. The Phillips house had just been put on the market when they happened to drive by the neighborhood, and it was love at first sight. After more than a decade of stewardship, they're often asked what they love best about living in this beloved landmark.
My answer is always the light, because you just can't compare to living in a home that's basically cladded in windows, at least 50%. I mean, we have almost no walls in this house. There's nowhere really to hang anything. It's just all light. I think James would probably say the divider, because that kind of is the core of the home, and our kids have just like grown up running around the house, and that's kind of where all the action takes place, is which side of the divider are you on? Are you on that side of the house or this side of the house?
Raising their family in this home, in this neighborhood, has connected the Moores to architecture and to a greater sense of community than they could have ever imagined.
We are literally bought the home and got married the same weekend, so we didn't have family in mind at the time, and then now we've grown with 2 children in the house, and I can't imagine raising a family in another home, just because they get all this natural light. They get this house that looks like no other home in the city or anywhere. And then it's just raised them to be really aware of architecture and design and the importance of it.
There were a lot of influential families that lived along this street in particular throughout, since like the 60s and maybe earlier. And I think the fact that a lot of them still live here is amazing, you know, and they've kept this neighborhood. They watch out for each other. They were, you know, tight families. And they've kind of welcomed us, you know, into the neighborhood as well, which has been awesome. So I think it's just important to keep that alive.
At the corner of Givens and Maple Avenues sits the home of the prominent King family, well known in Austin as proprietors of the historic King Tears Mortuary, and for the legacy of family patriarch Dr. John Quill Taylor King, a civic leader, U.S. Army general, and titan of academia and business. This grand tri-level home boasts several hallmarks of the contemporary style, including its low-slung, wounded dove gabled roofline, variegated red brick, and clerestory windows. Dr. King and his wife, Marcia Hines, commissioned the home for their family of 6 in 1959. The King's youngest son, Stuart, lives here with his wife, Sonia. He recalls the coterie of local design and building professionals his parents enlisted in the home's construction, including family friend John Chase.
My mother always wanted beams in the house, so she got her beams. John Chase, my dad, talked about it, and they made it happen. Now, Arthur Parks was a contractor. A.J. Quinton worked with him and the Freeman brothers. They did all the brickwork. outside. They were good masonry family. They still in Austin today.
Mrs. King's beams articulate the generous high ceilings of the living and dining spaces, beautifully lit by stained glass windows depicting Texas wildflowers. The original wood-paneled kitchen boasts a pass-through window with a breakfast counter that was the center of family meals and even features some original appliances, including a new tone intercom. Dr. and Mrs. King were professors at Huston-Tillotson, and Dr. King eventually became the university's longest-serving president. During his tenure, he commissioned the brutalist King Seabrook Chapel on campus. As the head of an HBCU, the King's home became a hub of entertainment and a waypoint for prominent politicians, educators, and entertainers passing through town during segregation.
But we've had some great times in the house. People coming through. At that time, I really didn't care, but now that I look back on it, I wish I had the opportunity to talk to these folks, especially Eleanor Roosevelt, Queenie, that was in Gone with the Wind. Because all these people would come to the house because of Huston-Tillotson. So that's where blacks got their culture from the school. So celebrities would come, they'd come to Huston-Tillotson because there's nowhere else to go. You couldn't eat downtown. You couldn't stay in the hotels because, like I said, that was during segregation. So when they traveled, when they'd come to schools to recruit, to visit the school, for different cultural experience for the students. That's mainly why they came. Eleanor Roosevelt came here and I was scared to death. My sister wasn't. So my sister, she was here and took a picture with her. I was hiding upstairs. I didn't even want to be bothered. I was doing something else.
Other visitors included pianist Don Shirley, whose story was recently told in the 2018 film Green Book, and jazz musician Lionel Hampton. Stewart's grandmother, Alice Woodson, was acquainted with some of the 20th century's most significant black intellectuals from her time at Fisk University, including W.E.B. Du Bois and Mordecai Johnson. Alice and Mordecai were college sweethearts and reunited later in life after their spouses passed.
My grandmother married Mordecai Johnson in his house, the first black president of Howard University. They were college sweethearts up in Nashville. They were supposed to get married and they didn't. So his wife died. So I don't know what happened, some kind of connection where they got in touch with each other. He came down here and asked my dad, could he marry my grandmother? They got married right here.
The King family has served East Austin's black community as morticians since Charles B. King, Stewart's grandfather, founded King Funeral Home in 1932. Dr. King inherited the business and commissioned the Chase-designed building on East 12th Street in 1955, after the firm merged with the historic Tears Funeral Home. Together, Sonia and Stewart continue the family tradition of managing King Tears. Since joining Stewart here, Sonia has embraced the rich history of her home and neighborhood.
I fell in love with the community. I love the ladies in this community. Stewart always takes the trash can for Miss Pat across the street. And I always was like, why do you do that? Like, why do you always take her trash can every Friday? And he said, I did it for her mom and dad. And I was like, okay, you know, so those
as
are,
a kid.
You know, so those are the things that I love about the community.
When at home, the Kings enjoy spending their time in the ground floor family room, which was remodeled in the 1980s following a fire. Decorated with Dr. King's collection of historic memorabilia, it features a built-in bar area and French doors that open out onto a covered patio with a fire pit, where Sonia can often be found studying for mortuary school.
I love living in this house. Sometimes I feel like, you know, I can even feel the presence of everyone who's been in this house. It's a peaceful place.
The Rogers Washington Holy Cross Neighborhood Association has existed for nearly as long as the neighborhood. However, their path to historic district designation began in 2016 after an uptick in demolition.
As a reluctant neighborhood association president, we put together a petition to go to the Historic Commission and ask them for a moratorium on demolition. They informed us that that was against the law and they couldn't do it. So we tried to find other tools, anything that could help us save this neighborhood, because we saw it falling around us every day. So the Austin Preservation helped us to formulate some design standards that we could put in place to at least preserve the character of the neighborhood. We walked the neighborhood, we put out petitions, we had events, we made sure that every effort was made to let our neighbors know what we were trying to do and how they could help. And eventually, we did succeed.
The years-long project was hard-won. For many communities, the logistical and financial barriers to becoming a historic district are often too burdensome. Demolitions can outpace advocates, leaving many neighborhoods vulnerable. But Rogers, Washington, Holy Cross neighbors pushed on, compiling histories, creating design standards, and bringing homeowners together around their vision for the district. Preservation Austin assisted their effort with 2 matching grants in 2018 and 2019. And in the fall of 2020, Rogers, Washington, Holy Cross became Austin's first historic district designated to honor Black heritage. A new state historical marker will soon honor the site of Holy Cross Hospital too, thanks to the advocacy and research of neighbor Barry McBride. Their success is a model for how preservation can help save communities at a time when East Austin's historic Black and Hispanic neighborhoods are more threatened than ever. Stronger preservation protections and greater accessibility to the districting process are critical to supporting grassroots advocates in this work. While the issue of increased taxes and displacement remains ongoing for Rogers, Washington, Holy Cross, and its people, the immediate benefit of halted demolitions has been a relief and a reminder that their struggles and triumphs will not be forgotten.
They cannot tear down any houses. That's all I want. To me, it's ruined the character of our neighborhood. You know, the essence of what people hard-earned money built in this community.
These were ranch houses. Most of the houses that you see on the street are still originals. And we wanted to try and save them. Being with historic designation, we feel that we're going to have more people who will want to maintain this neighborhood as our parents have tried.
Beyond its physical protections, the historic district designation also means the preservation of a community and a culture that has endured generations.
It meant to me personally that all the sweat and tears that our parents had to go through with redlining and not being able to actually get the loans that they needed to build the houses that they wanted, where they wanted, and having the jobs to sustain those houses, all of that would have gone to naught. And I'm just so glad that we're able to preserve that history and that culture.
You know, what I love about the neighborhood is that it's really that. It's the people. The people. When we grew up here on this street, everybody knew everybody. On Maple, everybody knew everybody on this street. Givens, everybody knew everybody in there, because one of the common denominators, a lot of these people were educators, so they knew each other.
Rather than freeze a place in time, the historic district preserves what matters and builds a future for the neighborhood that is rooted in heritage. It also means that the people who made the community a special place to live will continue to have a stake in its future.
So we've become a more diverse ethnically neighborhood, but we still have that great sense of community and the love that was there when we were all African American. It's still here, which is really great because our our new families have embraced the stories as well.
Oh, it'll still be here. I mean, I think we're on our 5th generation now, so it turns over, and I don't think my son, for sure, is going to let this house go. So we're going to be here.
Bye.